Welcome everybody to a webinar. It's Tuesday, the 17th of March, 2026, and we have a webinar with Julien Violette and Mathilde Bouquin on getting Key Stage 4 French Spanish students ready for the new GCSE. And this is part 2. We had a really successful one in November. I'm sure that a lot of you will have seen that. We will make sure that we have links to that when we send out links to this particular webinar. So the recording is going to be stored under webinars on the AWL London branch. We're always kind and we're professional, and we are very happy to host people free of charge. Speakers and participants are responsible for what they say and display. We do hope that you will join if you're not already a member. It'd be great if you're in the chat, if you're a member, to say that you are a member, and please encourage people to do that. Obviously, we pay for the Zoom account and all the time that goes into putting things together, and people give their services free of charge. So it'd be great if people could join us. You get lots of discounts. You get a magazine, and really, so it's to do with being informed, connecting with people, and growing professionally. There are the costs. We think that it's really reasonable. And then the last time in November, Julien spoke with quite passion about the importance of being part of AWL. And in fact, we captured that and we put it on our website. So it was, I think that, oh, you've just unmuted yourself. So perhaps you're going to say that, Julien.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're a big team, but we get a lot of CPD out of AWL events. So attending the June and the January event, having the opportunity to go to Language World, those are a really, really important moment for languages teachers to continue their development. And the CPD quality is always exceptional, the opportunities to collaborate. So it's just a no-brainer. I know school budgets can tend to become or shrink every year, but this is one to definitely keep some money for.
Thank you very much, Julien. Okay, so coming soon, obviously tonight we're here with Julien and Mathilde. Tomorrow, we've got an AWL webinar on the DFE consultation for the Key Stage 4 performance measures, Progress 8, and that's going to be led by René Kogelbauer from AWL, the chair, and David Blow. And really, we do recommend that you come along to that. It'd be great to see you live or otherwise watch the recording. It's very, very important for people to contribute to that on an individual basis. This is a consultation where it really does count if individuals respond to it. So please do come along to that or watch it and definitely respond to it. And then we've already fixed our June event is going to be on the 13th of June, Saturday, 13th of June. We're going to be at the Greycoat Hospital, and we've got some lovely ideas. Those are the sort of things we're going to do to celebrate languages. So language tasters, getting ready for trips abroad, but also reflecting on GCSEs and A-levels, and of course for the primary as well. So this is about what's going to happen tomorrow, the webinar. So please do come along to that. And then the other thing that we'd like to promote always at our webinars is the London City of Languages, which AWL London is supporting. Lots of things going on there, including a poster competition, which we've launched. We'll send out details of that. And we're present on lots of social media, but in particular now we are using LinkedIn. It seems that most people now are using that, so we're no exception. So really do welcome Julien and Mathilde to the session, which you've already signed up to, so you'll have read what's going to happen. And there we've got a little introduction to Mathilde, so you can read her bio, which you'll have seen again when you signed up. We are so lucky to have these people who are leading in the Harris Federation, obviously with a lot of experience, and that you're willing to share with us as well. We are ever so grateful for that. So I think this puts Harris Schools in an extremely good light. You'd know that if you went to work there, you'd have these people who would be in charge of you right at the top, and that's great to know. And an additional thing which we will say for Julien, who's very modest about that, but he's written a really good book called Secondary Languages into Action, along with colleagues, David Shanks, Natasha Salvini and Luma Hamid. And I definitely would recommend that particular book, which we will, again, give you details of that when we send the details out. So without any further ado, I hand over to you, Julien and Mathilde, and say thank you very much indeed I will stop my share and allow you to start sharing your screen.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time this evening, especially because it's a busy time of the year and we're all very tired. There's been a lot of CPD opportunities as well recently. I'm just going to check that my screen is sharing, or perhaps I need to do it this way. Yes, perfect. So we're really excited and really honored that ALL trusts us to deliver some of our CPD that we make available to our teachers during the conferences. But it's been so well received by our teachers that we felt perhaps we should share it with everyone else. We're all in a situation where we are a bit uncertain about this new GCSE, but we've learned a lot as a community in Harris for languages preparing for this new GCSE, and we've had successes and challenges along the way, and we feel that we want to share that with you and let you know what we've been able to manage to do to prepare our students. So this is a session or part 2 of the initial session we did in November, but you don't need to have attended this today to understand what we're going to do. We will revisit some of it and we will extend it. But first, perhaps we are keen to hear from you in the chat. Just let us know out of curiosity which exam board you currently follow for the new GCSE. And perhaps share with us where are you at in terms of your year 11 and their most recent mock exam outcomes. Is there anything that you're particularly proud of or any worries that you have? Because that might help Mathilde and I address it when we present today. But also, if you have any good tips on revision plans that you're doing with your year 11 at this stage, again, we would be really keen to hear from you. In terms of session objectives and desired outcome, we are going to quickly revisit some of the previous strategies that we shared in the webinar in November, and we're going to reflect on the impact of those strategies. And then we will extend those strategies by talking to you about new teaching methodology and other strategies that we've used in our schools to prepare our students to their GCSE exam in the summer. There will be hopefully a nice mix of strategies that we believe are teaching strategies that will be useful and good for teaching the course, but there'll also be strategies that are specifically designed for the time of the year we're at. We're very aware that we are in the final stretch, and therefore we will be sharing some strategies that perhaps are not strategies we would recommend as teaching strategies from the beginning of the course, but are more emergency strategies to get the best outcome of your students at this stage of the year. So what we often call preparing for exam. But there'll be a nice range, so hopefully you'll feel that there is always something to take off. By the end of this session, we hope that we'll have provided an opportunity to reflect on the impact on strategies we've shared before, but also shared a vast range of strategies that you'll feel will be useful for the next month or so. We're going to focus particularly on listening, reading, writing, and speaking in that order. So let's start with part 1, and let me recap briefly what we talked about in November. So when we initially started the new GCSE course, one thing that we changed drastically with our network is the way we would deliver vocabulary and ensure that vocabulary is acquired by students. We realized really early on that although the vocab lists were fixed and limited, there was actually a lot of content to deliver within 2 years. We certainly feel that we don't have enough within year 10 and year 11 to deliver all of it. And we felt that we needed a new system in order to build upon the vocabulary acquisition that happened in class and strengthen and consolidate it outside of the classroom when we have time limits and curriculum time that perhaps is short. So what we changed is the approach to homework. we introduce flipped learning through prep booklets that you may have seen before that are available and will be available to you after these sessions, that encourage students to learn and practice vocabulary as well as their prior knowledge from Key Stage 3 before coming to the lesson, so that they are better prepared. They have revised things that they've learned at Key Stage 3, they have acquired knowledge, and the teacher can spend more time on the actual practice and the delivery perhaps of complex concepts and grammar and phonics that will be necessary to spend time on in the lesson. So this is a booklet that has weekly tasks for students to complete that takes about 30 to 40 minutes. And we encourage, and we've had great participation from our schools. All our schools have adopted them and love them. And we've seen a massive impact in how much homework students are completing nowadays. We went from perhaps in the previous exam board or a previous exam having inconsistent homework policies across departments in our schools to pretty much having now every single school delivering weekly 30 to 40 minutes homework with all of their students. And we do feel it has had a massive impact in the outcome of students. We see it in listening and reading, but also in their engagement in class and readiness to learning. So we encourage you to have a look at these. There are QR codes here, but don't worry, we will share those again later on, so you'll have your own time to go and look at these if you feel they would be useful. At this stage of the year, what I would like to say is they're probably a really nice resource to print and give to your students for their own independent revisions. We have one per module, so there's 8 versions of them. They exist for both languages. And if you haven't used them before, perhaps you will find them really useful to encourage your students to do revisions. In addition, oh yes, sorry, Mathilde, this is your turn.
That's okay. In November, we also spoke to you about our reflection on the best way to test vocabulary, to check that our students are learning it well and remembering it well. And our reflection was around what vocabulary our students need to know. So in the reading paper, they need to have a receptive knowledge of vocabulary. They need to understand words on their own and also words in context. In the listening paper, it's very similar, but obviously they hear them instead of reading them. In the dictation, which is the last part of the listening exam, it's also receptive knowledge of vocabulary, but here we want students to be able to write a word that they hear, applying SSCs. In the speaking and writing exam, we are talking now about productive knowledge of vocabulary, where students can use vocabulary to respond, vocabulary of their choice. And finally, in the writing translation, they have to produce specific vocabulary. So with this in mind, we thought we need to check these different levels of vocabulary knowledge. We need to check the receptive knowledge and the productive knowledge of our students. And that's why we created this new multimodal vocabulary test that we shared with you in November. You can see in the first column, it says listen and write, where students, it's a dictation. So students simply listen to words and write them down. In the second column, listen and translate. They listen to the word in the target language and translate them into English. In the third column, listen and respond. This is to practice the following questions from the speaking exam, where students need to understand a question, so they are listening to it, and they respond with a few words, minimum 2 words, that communicate a clear answer. The last 2 parts of the table are translation for the reading, where students translate into English, and translation for the writing, where students translate into the target language. I've added the last row in red because since our November webinar, we've realized that it was taking a long time to complete this vocabulary test, and a lot of our schools that have been using it have told us that a good way to make it more manageable during lesson time is to do less questions. So removing perhaps the last row of this table is a good option. We also spoke about how we can motivate students to prepare well for the vocabulary quizzes and to really feel motivated by it. So we came up with this idea, and if you have different ways of motivating your students to learn vocab and to be competitive about it, do share them with us. Los genios del vocabulario, les génies du vocabulaire, where we can track students' score from one lesson to another, week on week. And the aim is for the first student who gets 100 points, getting a point for each mark they got right in the vocabulary assessment. So it could be a nice way to display this in your classroom and to have the name of all your students, and they can see their progress along the way up to the top of the mountain. That was a way we thought could really engage your learners into vocabulary learning and doing well in their tests.
All right. So some reflections. First of all, we'd be really keen to hear from you if you've had any experience with doing flipped learning, and if you're noticing any impact when delivering this new GCSE. From the perspective of our network of schools, as I mentioned previously, we've had a full round really of schools adopting it and not regretting it. It takes a bit of time, obviously, to set up and to encourage students to do it at the start and to monitor it. But we've come such a long way, and now it is so lovely to go into the schools that we visit with Mathilde and I, and noticing teachers doing regular correction of the booklets and walking around and seeing those students getting ready, taking their booklet out and showing us their homework with pride. So for us, definitely an impact, but please share in the chat with us any of your successes if you've done flipped learning, or any of the challenges that perhaps we might be able to offer solutions to, or suggest any strategies. Same thing for vocabulary learning. Now, in terms of vocabulary, so these quizzes, Mathilde and I introduced them in November. We've been implementing them in our own planning for our network. We've seen a lot of our teachers also buying into them. We don't know yet the impact, but we've definitely felt that changing the way we tested vocabulary would allow students to practice all those key skills that students require vocabulary for in the exam, as Mathilde mentioned. So perhaps a more useful way to test vocabulary for students than the traditional linear translation model that they would only experience in the reading paper. And yes, just share with us in the chat your ideas and so on. We are sharing all those resources as well on a Google Drive, but we also create Quizlet quizzes. So you can search for us. All our quizzes are available on Quizlet. We've done quizzes for every module. So if you use this QR code, you'll get to our page and you can follow us and use and amend our vocabulary quiz as you see fit. All right, so we're going to move on to talk to you now about improving outcome in reading and listening. What are the strategies that we've been looking at since November? We're going to return first to paper design and impact of the design of those questions. And then we're going to revisit an idea from November again, this importance of carefully sequencing the receptive practice so students do feel they're making progress when doing listening and reading. And we'll be sharing templates that we make available to our schools to do that well.
So starting with the reading paper, this is a reminder of the way Edexcel are structuring the reading paper. Looking back, first of all, at the different question types that are available in the reading paper. We have multiple choice questions, and we're going to show you an example of what they look like. this is for the first question of the foundation paper only, example A. And then example B is the regular multiple choice question where there is a question and 3 choices. We also have multiple response questions where students have to tick 3 statements that are correct according to the text. The word cloud is probably my favorite. I don't know why, but I think it's probably the name, word cloud, where from a box with different options, students have to get the correct answer to fill in the gaps. Open response is obviously questions where students have to answer in English. They don't have to write in full sentences. We've got 2 different types, examples A and B, which are going to come up on the screen, and example C. And finally, we have also the translation. So they're not coming on the screen, but it's okay. Now, what's really interesting with the Edexcel reading paper is that they have a guide online that anyone can access that describes how the reading papers are designed. And they have 3 types of questions. They have the recall questions. Let's have a look at what the definition is. A recall question is when, by recognizing specific words, the students can get the answer without having to rely heavily on the understanding of the structure of the language. I think you can guess in which tier we are going to find more recall questions. If you want, you could write it in the chat. In which paper, in which tier, are we going to see more recall questions, in your opinion? In the higher tier or in the foundation tier? The process questions, absolutely yes, is going to be in the foundation. We'll see this in a minute. The process questions is when students need to recognize grammatical and lexical relationships in context to work out the correct answer for a question. So knowing the meaning of vocabulary as individual words will not be enough. And finally, the inference questions. This is when students infer the meaning of a single unknown item of vocabulary from their knowledge of the surrounding content. We'll see some examples of those in a minute. But let's see a bit more. Now, these questions, the inference questions, we have 2 of them in the reading paper. It's always in the same place with Edexcel. That's something we spoke about in November. The paper, the format is always the same, so it's very predictable for students. In the foundation paper, the inference question is always 3B and 7B, and higher is 2B and 4B. Let's try to unpick a bit more the difference between recall questions and process question. Let's see. Oh, I forgot to mention that they are also, it's also in the listening paper where we have this type of questions. We don't have the inference question, obviously, in the reading paper. Sorry, in the listening paper. The inference question is only in the reading paper. So, in the listening paper, I think, Julien, there is one more animation. Yes, that's really useful to know from Edexcel that the foundation paper for listening, 25 marks are recall questions, so it's half of the paper, and 15 marks are for process. The marks that are missing, because if you add them up, it's not giving you 50 marks. The marks that are missing are obviously for the dictation. In the higher paper, it's the other way around. 30% of the mark are for the recall questions and 50% for the process questions. So we are challenging students a bit more. Let's have a look at what they look like in practice, these recall questions and these process questions. So here we have a listening question for Spanish. And you can see that the question A, Raquel gets on well with her mother, her sister, or her aunt. When we look at the transcript, me llevo bien con mi hermana, does it look like a recall question or a process question? Question A, Raquel gets on well with, the transcript says, me llevo bien con mi hermana. Is it a recall question or a process question? What do you think? Absolutely. Excellent. This is a recall question where, just by recognizing the specific words conmi and mana, the students can answer. But if we look at the following question, Raquel's brother is difficult, tall, or hardworking. They need to understand mi hermano trabaja mucho and interpret what that means. So he works a lot, therefore he's hardworking. So here we've got a good example of the difference between recall and process question. That's important to know and to understand, to be able to train our students on answering the process questions well, because they have no trouble answering the recall questions well. That's when the process questions come in, that they don't always realize that they have to process the information. Moving on to the next slide. Sorry. We are back to the reading paper, looking at some examples of questions from the foundation paper. So this is question 3 in Spanish, and this is question 3 in French. And we are going to look now at a different type of question from the Spanish foundation paper and also from the French foundation paper. Here you can see that, first of all, we have different types of question. On the left, it was multiple choice question. On the right, it was open question. But also, we are not asking the same type of questions. So one example had recall questions and inference question, while the other had process questions. And what's really, really important to know is that the process questions, they start in that example, which is question 4 of the foundation paper. So these two examples that we have on the screen, on the right-hand side, it's the question 4 of the foundation paper. And if you show us the next animation, Julia, you will, that's it. You will see some important information from Edexcel. So one more animation, please. And one more. That's it. Oops, sorry. Let's go back one step. Brilliant. So from question 4 in the foundation paper, we are told by Edexcel that there will be at least 3 process marks. It may also contain recall. And it's the first question in the foundation paper where we introduce process marks. So the beginning of the paper in reading only has recall marks. So it starts very easily for students, but from question 4, they need to start paying a bit more attention to the relationships between words. So let's see what the impact is for our students. This completely makes sense because from question 4, we have so we've looked at the structure of the foundation and higher papers, and we have kind of guessed which grades are which questions. Apart from the crossover questions 6, 7, and 8 at foundation, and question 1 and 2 and 3 are higher, which are the grade 4 and 5. Apart from that, we haven't been told officially by Edexcel question 4 and 5 are grade 3. But we are guessing it from the way the paper is designed. So from question 4 in the foundation paper, we have process marks. From question 4 in the higher paper, we have the grade 6 and 7. So the question that we start including higher tier vocabulary and grammar. So this is the time in the paper where students need to pay more attention and apply very, very specific reading strategies so they can answer the question well. And that's really important to highlight this with your students so that they get more successful in the reading paper. Another thing that we want to show you is that we've looked at our students' mocks that they did in January. We've looked at the papers where they lose the marks. And what we have decided is to tell them now, next time you complete a reading paper, from question 4, put a little star at the top, write a reminder for yourself, start annotating. We want them to start annotating the questions and the text. What would this look like? Let's have a look. So here, if the students had annotated the text and translated the words that they needed to understand to answer the question, where was the apartment located? So they look at the keywords in the question, where, and apartments. They wrote near the city, they were nearly there, but they missed something because they did not annotate. This is for Excel, but I believe you can transfer a lot of what we are describing to the accurate reading paper. There are lots that you will find useful. So if the student had annotated the paper, un piso is a flat, cercano near, centro center, and ciudad city, if they had spent more time, they would have got the correct answer. It's near the city center. Because centro being a cognate, I'm sure they would have got that right. So that's just an example of where students can get extra marks. Okay? Julien, you're going to take us through some exam strategies.
Yes, absolutely. So what Mathilde has been sharing with you, which she's mentioned, is fully available as a publication from the exam board. This is really, really important for the teachers to develop that knowledge. And then from that knowledge, we have identified that there were key strategies that we needed to keep pushing with our students to therefore prepare them better for this question, particularly ones that Mathilde mentioned, such as the process questions and the recall questions. So we've been thinking about those strategies, and obviously we don't want to ask students to use different strategies for different types of questions. So we've kind of come up with 6 ones that will always be useful, whatever the type of question they're doing. We're encouraging students to read the title and instructions always first. There's a lot of clues always to be given in a title or in an instruction, and they're in English. And then we encourage often our students to read the statements or question even before reading the text. For us, there is a psychological benefit to it. If students read the question or statements first, they are acquiring already some knowledge of the text before reading it, which means that for students who tend to struggle with resilience, they're less likely going to be discouraged by the difficulty and the complex words if they have already read the question and therefore making connection when they first read the text with, oh, that was one of the answer for the question. So they'll be less phased out by the complexity of the rest of the text, which when we show you some example in a minute, sometimes they really require to understand very little of a text. After that, the annotation that Mathilde has been talking about. Now, one of our big challenge is to convince our students to do annotation. And I'm sure you'll agree with us, it's really hard to convince students that it has an impact. So we model it ourselves to show them that when they do it, they'll be successful. So they need to try and do it. Then they are encouraged to read through the text. And again, doing the underlining and so on. We now also encourage our teachers, and this is a strategy that has been there forever, but to systematically and consistently encourage students to justify where they found the answers when they go through correction, just to force those students to take that habit of underlining in text and justifying and not just getting. So we're looking at some examples in here of answers from our students in the mock. And here we have an example of open-end response, which students tend to struggle with. It was the case also with previous specs, except that now at least they're always in English. So we've seen an increase in the engagement with those questions, but we're still seeing and spotting that our students are performing less well in those questions. And that's often due to the factors that we've just been mentioning with Mathilde. Lack of clarity of answers, perhaps because they didn't necessarily do the prep first. Vagueness or not looking at the right part of the text and so on. So here, for instance, example 1 would have been rejected by the exam board, although it had the keyword authentic, because the students was not specific enough when using it. Then in the second answer, not enough detail were given. So again, the students found where the answer was, but because they didn't provide enough detail, again, didn't score the mark. C, that's a really useful example of an answer where the students provided enough detail. The problem is they didn't use their knowledge of and their experiences of such a situation to realize that actually it didn't really make sense. So they wrote, take a picture for the internet, and that just with a little more putting yourself in the situation, the students could have got it right. But we're going to look at that. Finally, the last one again is about that lack of precision. So we've been encouraging our students to be more precise in open response, because we've noticed this is the single most important reason why they're underperforming in open response. And by modeling it to them, we are showing to them that they can be more successful by doing simple strategies, okay? So we've seen that example, I've just mentioned it, for instance, here. Take a photo of him. So the question was, what did the owner of the market stall let them do? And in the text, the reading text, it mentions tomar, which the students will have recognized. But it doesn't mention the word tomar. So the students inferred take because they recognized the word photo. However, the students perhaps didn't look far enough in the sentence to notice that there was the word internet. And therefore, saying to take a photo of him on the internet was not a logic thing. It's not what we do with pictures on the internet. So with a simple putting themselves into the context, thinking carefully of what is around the able to think, wait, don't take pictures on the internet, their own experiences. So strategies that we encourage them to do with open responses is this work of highlighting, annotating keywords, scanning through the text to make sure that they can find the precise answer, and then taking the time to write precise answers, because they don't need to be detailed. Importance as well, we've had to do work with students on not giving options when only one detail is required, because that's really important, even if one of their options is correct, but the other choice they gave was not, they wouldn't be awarded the mark. So it's really important to remind students of not giving us multiple choices when there is only one detail required. All right, so with that, we've developed a sequence and a template for teaching reading strategies. We've got the same in listening as well. And perhaps we've mentioned, I'll go back to what we mentioned in November. For us, the realization came even in the previous specs, that to improve listening and reading performance for our students, it was not about providing a lot of practice of listening and reading tasks, but instead building up a really strong sequence of practice that empowers students to see and to be modeled the right strategies, and to then practice independently those strategies to experience success. And we know that until we make them experience success, we won't convince them to follow what we suggest to them. They'll always want to go to the quickest possibility. So our new sequence is, instead of perhaps spending a lesson of 15 minutes doing 10 different listening or reading activities, we are going to focus on 4 of those, but we're going to model all around it how to do it through a I do, we do, you do model, and offer this opportunity for students to have this independent practice that will get them to feel that they're making progress and doing better. So we've got on there, for instance, always showing to the students the task, what it looks like in the exam, and reminding them of the key strategies that we want to use, which are the same for each of the questions that we do. Oops, apologies. Yes, and then modeling good practice. So telling them this is how we annotate for a reading. For instance, this is the sort of notes, and you can do it with them. Here we prepared it in advance, but you could get students engaged with giving you their own knowledge. Noticing that from there, perhaps certain questions, A can only take, for instance, the first 3 choices, whereas B and C can only take the last line of the cloud. So again, reducing the amount of choices. And then, apologies, I don't know how to do this pretty well. When there's animation is a bit more difficult. and then modeling again to them how you do then the prep into a text. And from them on, only inviting them to actually answer the question. After that, we give them independent practice where we are no longer modeling to them. We expect them to do that work on their own. And obviously, we would go through the correction to show them, again, good example of what they could have done for the preparation, and finally, how they would have got to the answers. So it's a longer cycle around one task. We spend more time in one task, modeling and convincing our students that preparation is key. But we are noticing better engagement from students, less rush in their answers, and more thinking. The same, as I said, we have been applying in listening, with obviously the slight difference that they can't read the text in advance. So, but otherwise, the listening strategies are pretty similar to what we've seen in listening. And so Mathilde and I have worked on what we call lesson builder, which are templates of all these activities that are available in the GCSEs. And they are ready for teachers when they want to plan a lesson for practices listening and reading, which we're doing, for instance, at the minute. Then they just get the template, put the task on. They can either copy them from the source if they have the copy of it, or just input it in there. Some of them have been using AI as well to do this, and it's just providing them with all of this so their planning is quicker. That will be available as well to you on our QR code. Structure for the listening, you'll notice that it's a very, very similar approach to the paper. So we know that the last, not the last four, the question 7, 8, 9, and 10 of the foundation are the first 4 questions of higher. And so we have worked out where what is the grade per question in each of those papers to help us. And again, as Mathilde said, it's about convincing students to do the right preparation. Now, I don't know what is your experience with the 5 minutes preparation time in previous specs with our students, but it's always been a big challenge for us to convince our students to use it to the full length, because actually 5 minutes is a pretty amount of time. But also, we've always realized that although we tell students to prepare it, realistically in 5 minutes, they could never go through the whole paper and taking notes. So taking into consideration what Mathilde has been telling us about those process questions and more complex questions, we've now been advising our students to only start this annotation of the listening paper for the 5 minutes from question 5, because for the foundation, because question 1 to 4 are recall questions. They're more likely to get it right without having to have a prep. But we definitely want them to prepare from question 5 so that they can make sure that they have a correct preparation for it. All right, I've answered my own question. That's because I don't remember what I had put in there. Apologies. All right, importance of modeling expectations. Again, we know so this is different in both examples, but in edXL, our students will have 3 listening to the audio, which we think will be pretty powerful for students, again, who previously lack that resilience in listening. And the exam board has been providing some useful strategies for our students to deal with those 3 audios. So the first one is a listen, and just listen with perhaps annotations and so on, but not responding. The second one is respond to the question. And the third one is check your answers. And so we can show you the impact of this work we've been doing about modeling with students. You can see preparation in the last mock we did in January, our students starting to take really good notes that is having a really positive impact on their outcome in listening and reading. Have we convinced all our students to do notes? I would be very dishonest if I told you yes, but we keep sharing those pictures of excellent preparation to the others to make sure that all students realize the importance and the impact that great preparation can have in listening and reading. So it's quiz time before we move on to the writing. In the chat, please. What do we call questions that require students to recognize specific words in a text without having to rely on their understanding of the structure of the language? Do you want to share that with us in the chat? Perfect, excellent answers already. It is the recall question, the 50% of it which will be in the foundation paper, 30% in higher. What do we call question that requires students to recognize grammatical and lexical relationships? And I already have answers in the chat. It is indeed the process question. What do we call questions that require students to infer the meaning? Obviously, it's in the answer. And so understanding the surrounding context of the word, that's the inference question. In the Edexcel reading paper, when should students start doing annotations? Do you remember what we've been sharing? In other words, when do the process questions and inference questions start happening? Not the inference, it starts a bit earlier, but yes, indeed, from question 4 onwards is when we want students to start making meaningful annotations. And that's because that's where the process questions start to really come along. What is missing in this sequence for practicing reading in class? We've got sharing strategies, guided practice, correction, and test and reviews. What have we missed in that sequence? And our modeling is there actually, Audrey. We've worded it differently, but that's the guided practice. So strategies, modeling, then correction, then test and reviews. What do you think is missing there? And perhaps it's because I haven't mentioned that one, Mathilde, isn't it? I skipped through it.
That's okay, you can do it now.
It is the consolidation of vocabulary. So before we close, and that's my apologies, I didn't share it. Before we close a task or a sequence of reading, we always revisit a transcript or a text and ask students to consolidate the vocabulary that they didn't understand at the time. It could be a quick find in the text task and so on.
And that's not the correct answer, because the finding in the text task is the test or review. So in the sequence here is the independent practice that is missing.
Okay, it's because I haven't used the same words elsewhere. For me, the test was the independent practice, so I got myself mixed up, but that's fine. So we'll summarize this in here. We know that in the Edexcel paper, the demand will be ramping in complexity. That's not the case in AQA. This is more a peak and trough situation. So it's important to make our students aware of what to expect in the paper. We know and we've encouraged our students that questions become more difficult from question 4, so they should start their annotation then. And in the listening, when they have 5-minute annotation, perhaps more realistically for them to be able to make as many annotation as possible to start from question 5, again, because that's where we see most of the process questions. The importance of having a meaningful sequence rather than a rapid and multiple practice of skills where students perhaps move on from one task to another without experiencing the success. Building this modeling, this independent practice, this review and testing again is an important part of now our way to teach for the skills, and we feel that students are showing us better and better confidence at preparing in those skills. So please have a go at it and tell us how it's impacting your students. It is still a challenge to encourage all our students to make annotation, but we're not giving up, and we consistently model it or show them good examples from their peers using visualizers, just to keep convincing more and more students that preparation is key. And we're going to talk more about that in part 3. I'm going to pass on to Mathilde.
Thank you so much, Julien. So in this part, we're going to look at how to improve outcomes in writing. We will revisit the exam structure for EdXL. We will also revisit how planning is going to be key for our students to be successful. And we are not going to have the feedback from Person EdXL. That's something I should have removed. So some reflection here for you to if you are doing EdXL in your school, let's see if you can remember the structure of each paper, sorry. So I'm not going to talk through this. I will just give you time, and then Julien, you can do the animation when we think we've had enough time. So how many tasks in each paper? Let's check the answers. Let's see if you had. Yes, so 3 tasks in higher, and we've got an extra one in foundation. So that's, yes, so 3 tasks, it's with the translation, so you are right. How long is the paper? You can choose the answer, Julien, because we are a little bit behind schedule. 1 hour 15 and 1 hour 20. I don't expect you to know the number of words for the translation, but it's good to be reminded about the difference as well between foundation and higher. And yes, the crossover question, I think we know them. It's going to be question 3 in the foundation and 1 in the higher. All the titles and rubrics are in English. We've made the same process in terms of unpicking what questions are targeting each grade. And in the foundation paper, we've deduced that the photo task is for grade 1 and 2, while question 2, 40 to 50 word, is for grade 3. We know that question 3 is the crossover question, so that will target grade 4 and 5, while the translation targets all the grades as we have sentences at different level. And for the higher paper, question 2 will target the grades 6 to 9, and the translation, all the grades from 4 to 9. So that's very useful to be reminded of this, especially when we mark the foundation paper. And when we start marking the question 1, we should remember we are marking a question that is targeting grade 1 and 2. So we have to be mindful of that and not to be too harsh when we apply the mark scheme. And same for the question 2 of the foundation paper. So this is just a quick reminder about the structure of the writing. Now we'll give you time to read a reminder about the full structure of the writing paper for foundation. I'll let you read from the screen. And now the writing paper for higher.
And so when we looked at this structure, and what we encouraged in our very first session was again this idea of asking students to plan, which is the most challenging thing to do, particularly when it comes to writing. So if your students are not already annotating in listening and reading, I can only imagine how difficult it is for us to convince them to do a plan in writing. But we felt really strongly about this. We knew that students that rush to answer a question will not perform as well as students who take the time to really look at the task and prepare a plan in advance. So this is the sort of plan we had shared last time. And we had also tried to think about an acronym that could help students think about key structures in good language that we would want them to do. Now, 3, 4, 5 months in, reflections on that from us is this didn't really work. Students were still not convinced they did in a plan. They don't feel that they have the capacity to do this plan. And the acronym didn't work because students would need to remember what it stands for, which again was creating too much cognitive loads for them because they had to remember those keywords. So we didn't give up on it because we still believe that planning was important, but we realized we needed to change it. We needed to minimize the cognitive strain when we asked students to do this planning. We needed an increased clarity of the messages and an increased quality of their, increasing their quality of accuracy in their answers. So that's the thing we were trying to work on. And we were making progress because perhaps one of the most decisive reasons why our network in the end went for edXL, not that there is a better paper at this stage, but was this idea of consistency in the papers that would make teachers feel reassured that they can really prepare students for specific things. And we're noticing that in the writing paper. So I'm going to talk to you through it. Talking first of all about higher tier and perhaps the most challenging writing task that they need to do, so the 150 words. Now, if you look on there, I've got 2 tasks from I believe these ones were the Spanish papers, but anyway, you could hardly tell, and it could work for French because the bullet points are in English. And I just want to invite you in the chat to share with me what are the similarities that you can spot between both tasks. Is there anything we can take that we can teach our students will always consistently be there in this specific task? So if you share in the chat, and then we'll review together, what are the similarities between those 2 tasks? There is an element of opinion, though I'm going to keep the word opinion away because this is more specific to the 80 and 90 word. But you're right. And yes, indeed, the idea of pros and cons is systematically there in bullet point 2 of all the tasks that we've seen so far for the 130 words. And indeed, you've identified that really well. Bullet point 3 has been so far systematically in the past, and the last bullet point in the future. So this is really useful for us to know. But again, it's not about just our knowledge. This is important to transfer this to our students so that they have this idea of familiarity no matter what task we prepare them for. So in summary, they'll always have bullet point 1, a response in the present tense. This is probably the most unpredictable bullet point out of the 4, which is interesting. Bullet point 2 is always going to start with the pros and cons of something. And that's really useful because that means that with students who are perhaps at this stage on the fence between higher and foundation, and you're really, really worried about what tier to enter them, there are more strategies we're going to look at in the moment to improve those weaker higher students in writing by providing support there. Bullet point 3 is always in the past. Bear in mind that when we are talking about the past, in Spanish, most commonly it will be the preterite tense, and in French, most commonly it will be the passé composé. So we're not looking at the imperfect tense for this bullet point, not to say that it will never be, they will never be able to use it. And the last bullet point will always be in the future, which can be answered with any future or conditional tense. So, as we said, our aim was, when we looked at our mocks in January, we need to improve something. We perhaps we perhaps overestimated how well they would do with bullet points in English. We were certain that they would answer all the bullet points from now on without any problem and always be relevant. And actually, we were quite surprised during both our mocks that despite the bullet points being in English, there is still work for students to make sure that they really look at those bullet points and answer those bullet points well. So we know that the biggest hindrance for our students currently in this task is completing all the bullet points, having consistent development, and then communicating clearly or comprehensively. Whilst for the quality of their language or the linguistic knowledge and accuracy, we are looking at improving the variety, frequent extended and frequent complex language, and having consistently successful time phrases, as well as accuracy. So minor errors are okay, but avoiding big errors. So we revisited this failed planning from November and thought, okay, what can we do to improve the planning of our students in writing that will be simpler and easier to them, for them? And because those bullet points are always going to look the same, we decided that we would give students key phrases for each bullet points. No matter the task that they are going to have to deliver, they could always use these. And by using those phrases, they will be able to enhance their work because, as you can see, it's color-coded. First of all, it includes the higher vocabulary that they need to show and demonstrate. It also includes complex structures, which is definitely needed. It encourages extended sentences with conjunctions, and it provides at least 3 verbs in the key tenses that is going to be accurate if they just memorize it. So this support that you have on the screen, I'm going to have to explain it a bit more. This came in place to support our students who we're still not sure can perform in higher because their writing is weaker. And what we're inviting them to do is learn those key phrases off by heart and ensure that before they start producing their answers, they design this cross on their paper and write for each of the bullet points or each of the 4 boxes, just 2 to 3 of any of those phrases they can remember to make sure that they will include them in their writing. And by having that tick list, or a total of 12 phrases, then we are confident that their writing will be better quality, will include more accurate phrases, more complexity, while still being clear and supporting students to answer the bullet points. We've got an example here in French as well. And again, we've done that work of making sure they're highly transferable vocabulary when possible, so that we don't need to give them a plan like this for every different module. This is a one plan for all modules that we want students to learn off by heart when their writing is weak and spend 3 to 4 minutes before they produce the task, just creating a checklist for each bullet points, having 3 of them, so a total of 12, and then start their writing. And we're seeing impact already of this. Today I was teaching in St. John's Wood, and I now force my students, so they are not allowed to write anything, and I redraw. So I just give them a plan, first of all, which is this grid, but it's empty, and they don't have the line paper, so they're not allowed to write anything else but a plan. And I only give them the line paper when they've shown me a plan that I'm satisfied with. So obviously I get a lot of puff and sigh, but I am noticing such an impact with my students who I was on the verge of telling their head of department that I think we need to move them to foundation because their writing is not secure, to now thinking, oh, they are writing pieces that are looking more and more like a grade 6. Even if they're still struggling in writing, the fact that they're doing those plans and including them in their writing is significantly improving their writing. The biggest challenge is always the same. It's about convincing students of the value of planning. Some students will not want to do that extra work. So you need to model it and you need to show to them that students who do it are successful and model it through perhaps a visualizers. But you'll always get this look or this look when you encourage them to do the planning, okay? Perhaps it's not about trying to get 100% of your students to do it, but supporting the ones that previously were not convinced that actually now they're successful and therefore they're going to be more successful in their real GCSE by doing it. The example is available in French in there, and with this modeling of encouraging students to do it step by step, picking the right task, annotating this task by highlighting words so that they make sure they keep being relevant, then making their planning through using that cross. We encourage them to do this on the page where they don't use the other writing as their plan. And they just draw that cross, and we tell them, have 3 to 4 key ideas per bullet points. Here is your task. Think about the ones that we've made you practice. Loads of practice on mini whiteboards so they memorize them. Quizlets to make them memorize them. And then they prepare just for 4, perhaps 5 minutes, those key phrases. But again, to convince them, you have to model it to them. So we've created, for instance, a model answer that just show them that in here, I'm going to accelerate it. Here is the full answer. And what you see, I need to get it right. What you see in black is all the phrases that came from their plan. So half of their essay is literally written if they do a good plan. In red is anything that they would have had to add to it to answer the bullet point. And then in yellow is the higher vocabulary tier vocab. And finally, you can see the tenses are also color-coded. So amber for past and future in green. But those belong to the plan that they've made. So we're really showing to students, if you do a serious plan, half of your essay is written because you probably already have 60 to 70 words. I'm going to pass that. I think the ones that are coming up in colors are extra complex structures that we know will be highly valued in their AO3. Yes, complex structures. All right. And I'm not going to spend significant time talking to you about the 80 and 90 words because Mathilde is going to do it.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, so we can recycle what we've shown you for the 130 and 150 word essays. We can recycle a lot with our students. Similarly to what we did earlier, we can definitely make our students spot patterns. Here, what would our students need to notice? That the second bullet point always requires an opinion, that the third bullet point is always about the past, and the last bullet point is always about the future. And we have this guarantee from Edexcel that the day of the exam, it should be the same. So it's very good to remind students every time you practice this type of question, just to remind them every time, because that way they will be very confident the day of the exam. So we have a similar summary to the one we looked at earlier for the question 3. So here for the opinion, it's a justified opinion. They don't have to give a balanced opinion with pros and cons. Whatever structure you choose to give your students for question 2 of the higher paper, use the same structures for them in question 1. So here we are talking about students who are needing a little bit of extra help with the writing and making them learn these key structures now in year 11 so they are ready for the exam will really help them. You can choose whether you want to use ce sera, it will be, or ça va être. You can be flexible according to what your students memorize more easily for the bullet point 4. But I think to help our students' cognitive load, we don't want them to learn different structures for one question and different structures for another one. So here, reuse them, recycle them as much as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, this would be also really useful for foundation students. So we've removed a lot of the higher tier vocabulary, but we've made sure to keep the key structures that were in the 150 words the same, so that students don't have to learn, as Matthew said, two plans. So let's summarize about writing. We do believe in the importance of reducing students' cognitive load, so it's important to reduce what we ask them to learn at this stage and instead reuse and recycle more efficiently. We know that although the bullet points have become are now in English, it's not a given that they're going to do a fully relevant response in detail. So we still need students to take the time to read bullet points carefully. And then we believe that the key to success in writing is this idea of pause and plan before you write. So hopefully we've convinced you to give it another go if you had given up like us before at making students plan, that with these new specs, with the consistency of the question, there is a renewed reason to pause and plan carefully the language they want to use. Provide students with your key structures, and they may well be the one that we've shared with you, or you may have your favorite one that you've already taught them and they're really successful at doing. So it might just be that you put it into a nice format for them to really learn them. Whatever structures you're going to use and provide students, it's going to be important that you practice them first. So we have them through Quizlets, but also we've done a lot of first practice in class through mini whiteboards to make sure that they're memorizing those and they're not using a printed model from us when writing. Building that routine of planning is important. Now, you might not want to be as mean as me, although I see Helen said she has experienced teachers elsewhere doing the same thing. I believe that forcing them to do a plan is a good thing, and it's not bullying. So I'm making them do it first, and I only give them the line paper when they've shown me they deserve it. I think writing should be deserved. If you show me that you've done the thinking, you're allowed to write. But then be careful with that, because they might still tell you, well, in that case, I don't want to write and I'm not going to do a plan. So not necessarily something I encourage you to do, but try your very best to model and show how it can be impactful for students. And feedback on their plan. Now, I love when I take a writing for them, I love to give them loads of highlighters in green to show them I'm really pleased with the plan. So even if they're still, inaccurate when they write or sometimes lack clarity, I'm able to say, look, in the bits that you used from your plan, that was excellent. And it's really helping me convince students. We're reaching the last part of our session. We're going to talk to you about improving outcomes in speaking. We are going to first talk about our key takeaways from our recent mocks. Now, you might have been lucky, like many of our schools, and taken part in the free Pearson moderation services. If you do Edexcel, that's definitely been a real game changer for us. Many of our schools did it. We received feedback on what first our students could improve for the GCSE, but second, give us feedback on our accuracy of marking and our conduct of exams. So I'm going to be sharing some of our findings, and then we'll talk again about strategies to improve the performance of our students. But perhaps let's have a discussion at this stage. And we've been talking a lot, so it'd be lovely if you want to unmute and actually raise your hand and do that, but otherwise you can just share in the chat. From your experience in the last speaking mock that you've done this year, what improvement have you seen in performance, and what are your areas of development still that you're working on for the summer? Anyone willing to share with us? Yes, I agree, Helen, that we've noticed that students have been better with pronunciation. It was particularly visible, for instance, for read aloud. I think that these tasks being introduced to exam, and then the previous work of NSELP and later on NCLE on phonics has really, really had an impact in schools. We're noticing better pronunciation in year 11 than previous years. So I would echo that as well. So let's have a look. You can still share in the chat or raise your hand if you want to share more. But here are observations from our network of schools. So we've got 31 secondary schools in Harris. I believe not all of them did a speaking, what am I saying? All of them did a speaking for the second mock. They might have done in January, some a bit later than that. But therefore, we've been putting together the key takeaways from it. What are the positive? In terms of preparation, we've definitely noticed that students' preparation, their notes from the 14 minutes preparation has increased in quality. So we've been really pleased with that. And perhaps that's because they're also taking it more seriously as well, or they're just feeling a bit more confident about it. But there's still things to improve with preparation, and that's to do with time management. We still have students turning up to their exam after the 14 minutes and realizing that they didn't have time to prepare the role play, finish their photo description, or they just completely ignore the read aloud because they prepared the other two tasks. I've even had students, and that's something I do not like about the new GCSE, because of the fact that we do not take their notes away before the conversation anymore. I've had a very, very hard-working students really stressed about their conversation, spending all 14 minutes writing down their answers that they knew off by heart, but they just wanted that confidence. And then they turned up and flopped because they hadn't looked at the read aloud, the reading, the role play, or the photo. So practice time management in class is really important. When you do this practice of photo and role plays and read aloud, are you timing the preparation you give to the students to help them better manage their time? Because sometimes I am guilty of just giving them 10 minutes to do a photo description, when realistically in the exam, I would never tell them to do it in 10 minutes. Model what perfect prep looks like, borrow it from their books, show it in visualizers, create your own models. I think students need to see a lot of what good preparation looks like. In read aloud, we noticed better annotations on cards. Certainly, at least I would say for the schools that I work in, if I think about mock one in November, where I had perhaps one student in 10 coming with a card with annotation in the read aloud, by January, I had more 7 out of 10 students came with some annotation on the read aloud. And that has had a massive impact. That's why I completely agree with Helen. I just noticed better pronunciation because they realized they could do something. But it was also them using the 1 minute preparation that is recorded, where they just say it. In the first mock, the students were too shy and they were just not reading it to me. They were reading it to themselves. And I did have some who were just looking away, thinking, what am I doing? And now, systematically in January, all my students were reading it out loud to me because they were listening to us about having that practice that will correct mistakes that otherwise they would do. What can they do better? Well, it's about making sure all of them are confident enough to use that 1 minute out loud and not just in their head. And then we noticed that what we hadn't done enough preparation on was teaching students to tackle the unprepared questions. So that's something we've been doing more of, and we'll be sharing with you, particularly strategies about the structure of the questions being often the same. Therefore, we can prepare our students to them. In role play, this is a task that we felt has increased in performance and success exponentially since the last specs. Obviously, it's got to do with the fact that the bullet points previously were atrocious. Many teachers could not even sometimes work out what was requested of it, whereas now it's really clear. So perhaps the only area of development in role play for us is that students are still not strong at creating questions that make sense and communicate clearly. And because Higher have to do 2 of these for EdExcel at least, I can't remember if in AQA you need to do 2 questions in the role play. Anyone wants to share in the chat? I can't even remember if there was an unprepared question, a surprise question, and then they had to ask a question. Okay, so they only do it once in AQA, but still, it's still a useful exercise. We need to teach our students to deal better with question structures. For photo, we saw a massive improvement in the extended description because we previously didn't prepare our students well to it. So they were doing photo descriptions that were better than in the previous spec, but were still relatively short. And we were taken aback by how little marks short descriptions were given in the commentary exemplars that the exam board provided. So we work really hard with our teachers to teach students to do really detailed descriptions, and we've put a number to it. We're telling teachers to require their students to do 3 details for each of these key bullet points. So 3 for people, 3 for activity, 3 for location. The exam board does not give a number for it, but we felt that with a number, we can help students feel like they've provided enough details. And we've definitely noticed in exemplars from at least Edexcel, that's the only one I can talk about, that when students give a lot of detail, but it's mostly about people, which they feel really confident with, but perhaps just give 1 detail for action and activity and location, they won't score full mark for AO2. So that's why we took the decision to put a number to it. And therefore, that came with the improvement that we're working on at the minute is supporting our students to do better at giving detail about action and location, because they find that hard. And we find that hard because those pictures are only in 1 location, and actions, they're most of the time all doing the same thing. So our students are telling us we want to do more detail. We just don't know what else to say once we've described it. So we've been putting things together. There is a hand up, so I would love to hear.
It's me, Julien.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something without interrupting you. I wanted to add that recently, because we've received feedback from Edexcel, who have moderated speaking exams for many of our schools.
Yeah.
Something that we don't have in the presentation from February is that for the picture task, Edexcel are looking for sentences that are well linked together, yes, so that the description of the photo is like a well-developed paragraph where all the ideas link to each other and where it flows quite well, rather than 3 different sentences that are not connected for people, 3 different sentences that are not connected for activity, etc. That's the feedback they gave us.
Yes, and so we've been talking to students about using conjunctions to put their sentence together, justifying their locations, for instance, by saying, because I can see things in the picture that tells me it's this. Justifying the weather, because we're still using weather. Weather, by the way, for us counts as location, not for us, but the exam board, Edexcel has recognized that describing weather will count for features of location. So justifying, again, why they think this is such weather, because people wear summer or winter clothes. Again, bringing this justification allow what Mathilde is saying to develop and link sentences together. Finally, conversation. What has improved is students have come better prepared. We use booklets to prepare our students to conversation. So they have a bank of questions to prepare, and they form about, I would say, 7 out of 10 questions that the teacher asks. And every 3 to 4 questions, we ask a spontaneous or follow-up questions to make sure that there is spontaneity in it. But we do prepare students to questions, and they get this booklet. Now, in November, they're never ready for it, but we felt in January they were more in tune with it and better prepared. But we recognize that we still have a long way to go with conversation. We are teaching students memorization strategies. We don't believe in asking students to memorize all their answers off by heart and so on for their chosen theme, but we believe in them memorizing key structures and chunks that will make their answers better quality for the language that they're using. So we're doing a lot of that work. And then practicing adapting questions to answers so they're able to deal with our spontaneous questions as well. So we're going to model that with you now. We're going to look at 4 of these areas of development I've been talking about. Tackling unprepared questions, which is the same in the read aloud and the picture task for Edexcel, I must precise, because I know that the read aloud questions, follow-up questions in AQA are slightly different. And then we're going to look at the others, but I'll mention them after. So what are we doing now to help students tackle better the unprepared questions? Strategy 1 is we've been looking at all the banks of resources we've received from the exam board, so all the samples and specimens, and we've noticed again a really nice pattern that those questions tend to have a key structures. So in the read aloud for foundation, question 1 so far tends to always start with ¿Qué te gusta? So if we tell our students and practice this type of question, they'll be more successful at it. Question 2 tends to, at the minute, always have ¿Qué piensas de? And sometimes extended by la idea de, which is not ideal because it makes a really long question by which the students find it difficult to understand the full meaning. But again, if we show them that this is always the question to expect, then they will struggle less and focus on the keyword that comes after the structure, ¿Qué piensas de la idea de? In higher, again, there are some similarities. For instance, question 1 might have a different question word, but we've noticed that the verb is always around te gusta, te gustaría, and then a complement to the question. Whilst question 2 is always ¿Cuál es tu opinión de? Or ¿Cuál es tu opinión sobre? Which, by the way, for me is a bit surprising that they chose ¿Cuál es tu opinión as a higher question and ¿Qué piensas as a foundation question? But that's my personal opinion. Same structures are available for foundation for the picture. So we've noticed that these questions come back, but question 2 is always an open question that is unpredictable. We just noticed that they're always in the present tense. Whilst for higher, there's a lot less predictability, but we know that question 1 is always in the present and the question 2 is always in the preterite. So it can be useful then to support students by preparing at least some key verbs that are highly transferable. The same obviously exists for French. And Mathieu, do you want to talk to them through it because you're more familiar with it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Julien. So it's very similar for French in terms of the following questions that we have after the read aloud. The first question at foundation is always with tu aimes or voudrais. Qu'est-ce que tu aimes? Qu'est-ce que tu voudrais? From the sample assessments and specimen papers. But Edexcel haven't said that the only way to ask the question would be qu'est-ce que tu aimes or voudrais. They just said it's an opinion. While question 2, they have said it will always start with qu'est-ce que tu penses de or des at foundation. For higher, the first question is always an opinion as well. No, it's not. It is, but it's a bit more complex than Spanish. So there is a range of question words that can be used. Comment, quand, quel, really depends on what comes next. Then they use tu aimes or tu voudrais, or they swap as well. They have the inversion, aimes-tu or voudrais-tu at higher. It's not as specific as Spanish or as foundation. And the second question, however, always starts with quel est ton avis sur? So these are for the following questions after the read aloud. After the picture, the first question is is an opinion as well. Often, qu'est-ce que tu aimes? But not only. We have, again, a range of options. Qu'est-ce que tu aimes? Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Qu'est-ce que tu penses? And so on. You will see the lists in a second. And the second question is an open question in the present tense. What's interesting is that the second question for the picture task, so the second question of the following questions after the picture task at foundation is the same as the first question at higher. So you can practice these questions as a crossover question. And the second question at higher for the following questions after the picture task will be a past tense, always. And here we have to train our students. If the question is qu'est-ce que tu as fait, we have to train them not to reuse the verbs, but to use a past tense verbs such as I went or I played, etc.
So we're going to look at that, actually, what Mathieu just mentioned. Noticing those patterns we saw in the questions so far in all the papers we've seen, and ojalá in Spanish, or what would be the equivalent of Ojalá in French, Mathilde? Si Dieu le veut, perhaps. We are hoping that the exam will always keep that structure, but knowing that, we feel that we can really practice with students, first of all, answer starters, and then adapting questions to answers. So this is our second strategy. Once they're aware of the questions, what are the type of answers we want? Now, we know that Edexcel has mentioned that for the follow-on questions, whether it's read aloud or for picture tasks, students only need to respond with a really short answer, a simple answer, and it can be just 2 words. It cannot be 1 word. It doesn't have to have a verb. So our teachers had been quite successful at preparing students, but we felt that perhaps this is a stage where we don't want to just teach to the exam, and we want students to be able to answer to a question like ¿Qué te gusta? Or what do you like? Qu'est-ce que tu aimes? By using the correct adaptation and starter to the answer. So using me gusta is not necessary to get 2 marks, but it's certainly a good way to start your answers and to make sure that you get 2 marks. Same idea with ¿Qué piensas de la idea de? Or Qu'est-ce que tu penses de? They would be perfectly successful saying es genial or c'est génial, but it's not a bad thing to teach our students to reuse the verb from the question and doing this, because it's not just about this part of the exam. It's about that skill of learning to listen to the question and readapt it. So we're doing this practice in class with our students. We've noticed this, by the way, that for Spanish, the preparatory questions, out of all the bank of questions we've taken together, we've been looking at 8 out of 10 times the verb fui would have worked. So making students think that fui could be the right answer for whatever the question is there can help students who are going to be really stressed about that follow-on questions. But it's about implementing that structure and modeling again. We believe in this idea of modeling throughout this whole course and exam. So showing them that in a question, there are words that we should not repeat, and we highlight them to them, so in here in red, and that some of them might need adaptation. So the te gusta becomes me gusta, the tu tiempo libre becomes mi tiempo libre, but also telling them that technically they didn't need to repeat and tiempo and libre, they could have just gone me gusta, so that they are part of the questions that are optional to reuse. And finally, that also they may not use any of this and just keep it really short. So jugar al fútbol will be a full answer. Now, showing them 3 ways of doing the answer, whether they do en mi tiempo libre me gusta jugar al fútbol, or me gusta jugar al fútbol, or just jugar al fútbol, we tell them this is all the 3 answers will get you 2 marks. And then we practice those with them on mini whiteboards, giving them other similar questions and asking them to do that thinking on their own and aiming for 2 mark answers each time, whichever the structure they decide to use. And we model that with all the types of questions that we've noticed in a similar pattern, telling them the parts to avoid, the parts to change, the optional parts to reuse, and what a perfect answer, acceptable answer could look like. And then that practice on mini whiteboards again. Mathilde. Oh, we can't hear you, Mathilde.
Yes, I think that's really good because I got a message straight away. So we're going to look at the second area for development, which is for Pearson at Excel, using the teacher prompts effectively to get more details in the picture task. We have been given very clear prompts by Edexcel. If we want more information from our students about the people, we can only say to them et les personnes, about the location, et c'est où, and about the activity, et que font-ils. Or we could simply say autre chose if we wanted students to add something else, but that would not really help them. We have the option to prompt them about the people, location, and activity, and I think there are better prompts. However, we need to teach these questions, we need to teach this prompt explicitly, because we've noticed that in the mock exam, when we've tried to get more information from the students and we said to them, et les personnes, they didn't know what we were asking them. Et c'est où, they are not used to being asked these questions. So here, teaching the questions explicitly will be very important in class, and also practicing the extra details that students could give if we ask them the question in the exam. So for the people teaching students that they can add description of the physical appearance. Il a, elle a les cheveux, il a, elle a les yeux. Or to talk about clothing, il, elle porte un pantalon. They can also make assumption about the age of the people or the relationship between the people on the photo. Je dirais qu'elle a 20 ans. Je dirais qu'ils sont amis. And include the mood. For the location, we can practice with students a lot of different details here. So first, saying where they think they are, and then, as Julien mentioned earlier, for students to mention the item they can see. Also, the weather, describing the weather is part of describing the location. And students can say what weather they think it is and justify it if possible. Finally, for the activity, if we ask Ecofonti to our students, an easy one for them to add would be il sourit, they are smiling, or il parle, they are talking. And obviously using the structure to be in the process of in French is very important. So if they had described the action of one person, they could then move on to describe the action of a different person if we prompt them to do so. So using this slide in lesson can be very, very helpful so that students know that if it happens in the exam, if we prompt them, what to do. For autre chose, what do we have? I can't remember.
We don't actually, Mathilde, but
no.
But it is a good point you're making. And EdExcel have been giving us feedback on really encouraging teachers to select a specific prompt according to the amount of detail the students have given. So it's really important that we listen to their description and that we don't necessarily go for autre chose as a prompt, because then you might have a student giving you an extra detail on person that you don't need. But instead, choose the prompt that will get the extra detail that you need for students to get full mark. So autre chose is just a joker, really. They can do whatever they want.
And so for those, I'm reading your message in the chat, Helen. For those who are still using PAMW, mood is part of describing the people, so it's not wrong to do so. And the weather is part of describing the location. I think it's about giving more clarity to students so they know which part they are covering when they describe the mood and when they describe the weather. I think that's important for them.
And they can always do weather, even inside, because what they can turn weather into is season. So we are encouraging students who have pictures about people inside where the weather is not clear to say something like, I think it's summer, because they're wearing summer clothes. So they can always mention it, even if the picture is not outside.
Thank you so much, Julien. The last, no, it's not the last. The third area for development is to prepare our students effectively for the conversation. We are going to share with you some of the strategies that we've been using. And here, it's a very powerful strategy. It's creating flashcards that really help students memorize the answers. Obviously, we don't want them to come to the exam and just to recite the answers without understanding what they are saying, but it's going to boost their memorization and it will help them using this strategy to remember chunks of answers when they are in the exam. So you can see that it's a two-sided flashcard. So imagine that the left-hand side is one side and the right-hand side is the back. And I'm going to take you through the details. But I'll give you a bit of time, perhaps, if you want to go back one step, Julien, for everyone to read so that they can really understand what's at the front of the flashcard, which is the left-hand side, and what's at the back, which is the right-hand side. So this is the general idea. And then the next steps are going to show you how we make students use their flashcards. So once they've created it, the memorization will happen in 4 steps. So first step, they have to get familiar with the answer, reading the answer out loud over and over. We can tell them to read it out loud 5 times to help them. It's important that they say chunk by chunk. So they read, for example, cuando era pequeña, they read it from the card, then they look somewhere else or they close their eyes and they say it again, cuando era pequeña, etc., to help them practice and memorize. The next step, when they've read it enough time, is to practice with support. So keeping the first letter of every word is really, really powerful. Obviously, students need to know the step 1 and step 2. Something important is that they need to understand what they are reading and what they are trying to learn. They need to know what it means in English in their head. Otherwise, they won't be successful. So here they can test themselves first, just with the first letter. Can they remember what they wanted to say? After that, they can highlight the letters where they are getting it wrong all the time or where they can't remember. That will help them really tackle the revision. And after that, they can reread the sentences, any sentences where they got, where they made mistake before they tasked so they have to go back to the previous step. They have to reread a sentence where they made a mistake when they have the full text on the previous step before they start testing themselves again. So here it's very important that if they can't remember something, they go back and they don't move to the next step until they can say the full answer from memory just using the first letter. Step 3 is a translation from English, where they have to spontaneously translate. They have the English in front of them, and they are saying the Spanish just by looking at the English. So they can test themselves, and if they are making mistakes or they can't remember words, they can highlight them, and they need to really practice and go back to a sentence in the target language if they got it wrong, and practice until they can translate the full answer into the target language without making any mistakes. The last step is using only the question that will be asked and the translation of the question and the key points. So there are key ideas here that can also include pictures if they want. Just by looking at this, can they remember what they want to say? So they need to test themselves and then go back to the text and highlight any words that they could not remember and practice until they can confidently say their answer without making mistakes. Okay, so here, that's the idea of using the flashcards.
And with these, so we've had particularly successes with students, for instance, again, that are in the borderline of higher foundation, who are really struggling, and when they're improvising answers, for instance, for the speaking exam, or their answers are too pedestrian and simple, that has really helped raise the quality of their answers and the detail. And also it's had a big impact for us with foundation students who until January are on grade 1 or 2 and even 3s. We're noticing a huge impact by supporting students to memorize who are not yet getting perhaps a grade 4 or 5 in foundation. And through this technique, being able to learn answers within 20 minutes, one answer really successfully. And once students realize that they're successful, you have unlocked something in them. They have all of a sudden that gain confidence that they're going to be able to make it to the speaking. And so you go that closer to having convinced them to revise perhaps during the Easter break or to revise before their exam. But it's important as a final point of notes on those flashcards to remind students that learning a question in this way, whilst it might take 20 minutes, so I've done it today with my intervention, my students within a 40 minutes intervention learn 3 questions because some of them are really, really fast. And it's important to tell them that this is only going to place their answers in their short-term memory. So unless they go back to it and test it in 3-4 days or a week, that answer will go from their memory. It's not learned and ready for the exam. All right, we're going to talk about the final strategy that we're putting in place to improve the performance of our students in speaking, and that's the balancing act of preparing students to questions, as well as spontaneous questions for flow of conversations, which, by the way, we know that in the exam board, in the mark descriptors. There is no longer marks given for spontaneity in Edexcel, at least, but it was there before in previous specs. But we do think that it's a really important element. We don't want students to come with a script like we used to 2 specs away when students were coming and having done it as a controlled assessment. So what are...
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. We have a great question in the chat about the flashcards.
Yeah, go on. Can you read it out to me? I can't see it.
Yes. Can you clarify? Did the student make the flashcard or did the teacher?
So that's a really good question indeed.
Yes.
We have a template. This is not yet on the Google Drive, but I'll be able to share it. We have a template. So long as you follow carefully how to print it, which is not difficult, but you have to just do it right because it's a PowerPoint thing, then you just get them printed by your person at school doing all the printing, get them cut out, and no, students produce their own flashcards, because by producing it, them start learning them as well. So we don't create the flashcards for them. They make them. All right. Let me know again, Mathilde, if there's any more questions going forward. So we're going to look at this. And our recommendation to have a good balance between prepared and spontaneous questions are the following. First of all, a reminder to all teachers, at least for Edexcel, that the very first question of the conversation must be on the topic suggested in the teacher's booklet. There is a suggested question, and Edexcel is telling us that we don't have to use it, but we definitely have to, if we change the question, to use the subtopic they're giving us. And they're not topics or themes, they're subtopics. So it's really important that you respect that. So I'll give you an example. Not long ago in the French one, the introductory question to the conversation was about homework. I always feel, by the way, my personal experience, I don't know what yours are, and you can share in the chat, is that that introductory question is always too difficult. So I never choose to do it. I always adapt it. But I suggest that for the real GCSE, you take sometimes to prepare different questions for them so that you're not missing the subtopic, because it's really easy when you improvise on the spot to get the wrong question out because you were just on the spot and trying to create a question and then you miss the subtopic. So prepare them if you're going to change them. So here is another example. Break time is the subtopic that is compulsory for the introduction question. But then I didn't like that question in Spanish. ¿Qué piensas de las instalaciones en tu instituto? Half of my foundation still don't know instalaciones. If I ask that as an introductory question, the conversation is going to start really poorly. I'm going to make my students lose their confidence where perhaps they've prepared really well. So I changed my question and I asked them, ¿Qué te gusta hacer en el recreo? I felt it was a better question. Okay, you might find a better question yourselves, but just take the time to look at them and think whether you want to use them or whether you want to change them. Okay, what matters is that you follow the subtopic that is in bold and in capital letters. So here are other suggestions. ¿Te gusta jugar al fútbol en el recreo? That way I know the students here is more likely to understand my question. Or ¿qué comes en el recreo? All right. Recommendation number 2 is more for our teachers. I've told you before that we've been giving teachers booklets that we've prepared and shared with our teachers that have questions for all of the different themes. And for instance, you've got an example of here in the Spanish one. Theme 6 has about 7 questions initially, or prepared questions. We have different number of questions per themes. It really depends how many weeks we spent on them and so on. But here is, for instance, the 7 questions we suggest for the conversation on theme 6 of travel and tourism. But it's important that we clarify to all teachers that a good conversation should not be asking those 6 questions as they are in here, first of all, and without any addition to them, okay? Because otherwise it's going to sound really rehearsed. It's not going to sound like a flowing, natural conversation. So there need to be things happening. We're suggesting, for instance, to teachers to be careful about jumping from one subtopic to another too quickly, and instead to spend more time trying to react to the students' response So if a student has responded to you telling you that last holiday they went to Spain, you want to ask them what activity they did there. And if they tell you that they went to the restaurant, you want to ask them if they liked the food. You're always going to want your spontaneous or follow-up questions to be really simple, perhaps opinion questions, yes, no questions, so that students are not put in a situation where they're going to really struggle. And we don't want the students to detail their answers for the follow-up questions. We just want them to have a natural reaction to us before we move on to another question that we feel they have perhaps prepared better. So that idea that the conversation needs to flow. By the way, the textbook have really good list of questions again. But again, it's about telling the teachers, you don't have to ask them all. You don't have to ask them in that order. You don't have to, you can add other questions. So here is a modeling for teachers about how to use those 6 questions. And I'm showing you already that this is a very different order because of the way the conversation will flow with the students. In blue, you can see there are questions that are my spontaneous questions that happen every 2 to 3 questions, just to prepare myself to react to the student's response and give them an opportunity to give me a short but spontaneous answers as well. You can see they're really easy questions. They're opinion questions. I might have a tense question in there, but I know I've practiced Te Gusto well enough that they will be able to answer it accurately. Final recommendation to boost this idea of doing spontaneous and balancing it out with preparing questions is this idea of keeping our spontaneous questions simple, so opinion, yes, no questions. Idea that there is a ratio, perhaps 1 surprise question every 2 to 3 prep questions. And one thing that is really important is avoiding persisting in asking questions that students were supposed to prepare if clearly they come to you and they haven't prepared. So we're telling teachers, if you've done 3 questions from the booklet and the students is clearly coming unprepared, stop using the question from the booklet, because they're just too high-level questions that will just show the lack of knowledge of your students. So instead, give up your booklet, close it, and ask simpler question, opinion question, yes, no questions to support your students with being able to improvise some level of answers that will get them some marks. Get the past and the future tense early, especially because the time sometimes is short, but make sure you do that naturally as well. So you're not just listing those past and future questions and moving on without reactions, for instance. Okay, I think we're ready for summarizing today. How are we doing with time? Perfect, 2 minutes. So for us, improving outcomes in speaking is all about creating routine for practicing weekly, first with mini whiteboard, in class, because it allows students to think about their answers, and then withdrawing the mini whiteboards once they've practiced the question and doing them in pairs as a speaking task. Practicing responding to unprepared question is important for us at this stage. That's the part students struggle the most with. Not ditching completely the idea of memorization. It will support students. It will support the quality and the range of their language. So we believe in it, so long as it's done well and with balance. And this idea of doing quick practice in class every week, at least a 5-minute practice of throwing questions at them and expecting them to do answers. But the importance of teachers' preparation to make sure that they prepare a naturally flowing and well-balanced conversation that doesn't feel too rehearsed, but also allows students to show off their skills. So thank you very much for today, for attending a really long webinar. We are really welcoming any questions or any feedback you want to share with us at this stage. We're going to stay a bit longer to answer them if you have any. But otherwise, we wish you a lovely evening and thank you for your time.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I suggest that in a moment we stop the recording so that if people got questions, they're not recorded, but we can make a note of them. Is that all right for everybody? But But just want to say we've got some lovely comments there. Thank you so much. Really excellent. And I know that we've got Pilar there as well, who obviously had a young person with her as well watching. I hope that he enjoyed it too, Pilar. And lovely to see you, Lavinia. Lavinia seemed to be the one who was winning all the time on the recall questions. Very good, Lavinia. But thank you ever so much for your time, for all of the effort that you've put into this. I know that this is going to be watched by other people. It's going to be used in training. And I'm sure that Pearson Edexcel will be very grateful for the fact you've really put a lot of things together here, passing on their messages. But also, so much of what you've done can be applied to AQA as well. And I think that may well be something for us to look at then afterwards as to how things can be tweaked a little bit so that the same messages can go there. But thank you so much. If anybody else wants to say anything, perhaps after I've stopped the recording, we can do that. Is that all right if I stop it now?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Oh, good. Stop recording.